Hello and welcome to the BurnCast. I'm Brady Byrne.
And I'm Kim Cass.
Today we're looking at a book called Pirates of Tropica, Dark Wind by author Nicolas Crucé. As always, any criticisms directed towards the authors and works that we discuss are exaggerated for entertainment purposes and are not meant to be taken personally. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show.
So let's talk about the Pirates of Tropica, and let's talk about Nicolas Sunblade, and let's talk about Gabriella, and let's talk about the goddamn weird, strange world of this man's fantasy.
All right. You want to just get right into it, huh?
Yes. We should start out by saying that, obviously, the main character's name is Nicolas Sunblade, and the author's name is also Nicolas.
Yeah.
So that would hint towards you thinking that he's jumped himself in a little bit.
Yeah.
The way that the story goes, it kind of makes you think he is, because there's some weird stuff in here. Some weird stuff.
Well, hold on. I want to get this out of the way first, because I think this is going to set the tone for the episode. Did you like this book?
Like? Not at all.
Did you hate this book?
Hate? No, I didn't hate it as much as other things I've read. I would say that I was fine with it until the end, and then I hated it. So I'm in a weird place now, because the entire time I was reading it, I was like, okay, it's a little bit weird, but come on, it's not like the worst thing ever. And then I got to the end and I was like, fuck you. Like, what the fuck is that?
Well, you're going to hate me because I enjoyed this book.
You son of a bitch. You son of a bitch.
Yeah. I was reading your messages before we recorded saying, like, oh my god, like, fuck. And I was thinking, oh boy, here we go. Because I enjoyed this book. Fuck it.
So basically what we have here is a prototypical pirate adventure.
To our surprise, it is about pirates.
Yeah, it is actually about pirates, or people living in a very piratical world. So, like, the whole world is pirates, basically.
Yeah, I mean, he's got this whole imagined mythos to it that is basically just the Caribbean. And things are, like, slightly changed. Instead of Ecuador, they're Equinonians.
Yeah. I mean, most of the people are just called Tropicans. It's really on the nose.
Yeah, and they have like a list of fictional words for their language at the start, and some of them are just blatant Spanish or Portuguese.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing, but I did want to bring up something, and I've been thinking about it for this book a little bit. I think when you start writing, there are different things that you, obviously at a very basic ground level, before you can do anything else, you need to make sure that your writing is up to snuff, so that like you can actually write sentences and you know how grammar works and all these things that you need. They're your tools, they're your tools.
Yeah.
And then you perhaps need to know how stories are written, the ABC or the, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, the rise, the fall, the whatever else you want to do in your particular story.
Yeah.
You need to know how story aspects work.
You need some kind of structure.
You need some kind of structure, and you need to know that before you start writing. And then later on you can focus on what you might call like good writing, as like knitting things together, twists, subversion, and undertones.
Yeah, or like getting more experimental with structure and pacing.
Yeah.
In general, if this is your first book or if you're a beginner writer,
just don't even bother with any of that. Just try write ABC.
Yeah, try to understand how it's typically done so that when you break the standard quote-unquote rules, you know why you're breaking them.
Yeah. You're doing it for a reason other than just like you didn't know it was like that in the first place.
Yeah.
So this is a good example of someone who has put a lot of effort into things that are coming in like the third stage of writing, like fleshing things out, coming up with your own language, doing a little map graphic, these are all things you shouldn't even worry or think about them until like you've got a good story.
Yeah.
And even then, you shouldn't really care so much about that shit unless it's really going out through a traditional publisher. Because why bother?
Yeah, that's all extra stuff. You don't have a book if all you have is a map and a language.
Yeah.
But if you have a story, you don't need a map and a language. So the story has to come first.
And so what I was going to say is that he's missed a whole lot of the second level stuff. He can write fairly decently. He knows how to put sentences together, but he's missed so much second level stuff. He hasn't thought of...
I'm going to disagree.
No. I swear to God, I don't know. Who is this book for? It's written as if it's like a young teen pirate thing, but then you get all these really weird sex stuff which is scattered throughout, and it's not so bad.
No, it's not like overtly sexual. It's more just flirtatious stuff.
Flirtatious. There are some sexual things in it, though, towards the end, which were pretty graphic and pretty, like, weird. But then there's also, like, some just bonkers childish behavior. Like, Nicolas Sunblade will jump up onto the fence or something like that, dancing.
At a cat stance.
When he's under attack, and be like, "Are you ready for this maneuver?" Like, and he'll do something ridiculous. It's so childish and so stupid.
He'll wink at his opposition, do a backflip.
Yeah, and it'd be like, "How about that for a mamba?" Like, he's like so stupidly childish when it comes to so many aspects. So he's gone and thought about maps and language and things like that, but he hasn't thought about, like, who's reading this book? Or, like, is it for kids? Is it for adults? It's just, like, a mess in that regard.
Yes. I'm gonna come out and say it. I think it works for the character.
It does not.
I think it works. I think it works for Nicolas Sunblade to be kind of childish because he is kind of a man-child, and he's living in a very graphic adult world of pirates and gluttony and looting and murdering and raping and all that sort of stuff, and he doesn't exactly have the maturity to match it, and that's part of his character. It's why he gets into so much trouble with stuff, because he's reckless, he's hot-headed, he's kind of an idiot, and the distinction here, I would say, is instead of writing an idiot character who just comes off as, like, an asshole, even though he's supposed to be, like, badass. This character is written as an idiot in the context of the story. People call him an idiot. The story is aware that he is a buffoon.
I mean, yeah, to some degree, like...
And so it then becomes part of his character. It's not just a mistake by the author to not understand the level of maturity that a character should have.
I agree with you in some ways, and I disagree with you in other ways, because, and I do want to start off, perhaps this will clarify a few things, but when we pick up the book and you read the synopsis, it titles Nicolas Sunblade as this guy. He went to, like, an academy, yeah? It's like the Blade Dancer Academy, and I literally thought that was just meaning that he was a master swordsman, you know? But it actually was literal. He is literally dancing in combat.
Yeah, well, it's like a magical combat style.
Yeah.
Because he's a solar elf, and they use some form of magic. I have no problem with this.
I had a huge problem with it, because, like, that's one thing, but all he does is spin around and shake his ass. Like, it's so stupid. Like, literally, there's a part where it says the weight shifted to his hands because he was spinning so wildly, and it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and there's parts where, like, to distract someone, he kicks a coffee pot into the air and then leaps into the air and kicks it again through a window. And it's a bit like an anime or something that the characters all feel very weightless and this sort of thing. But he's an elf. He knows magic. I'm willing to accept this. Like, we often talk about books that are going outside the confines of the physical properties that we would expect. And if you have a magic system, or you introduced to me early on that characters are capable of above average things, then I'm willing to go with that. And I was totally fine with Nicolas Sunblade's silly dancing, and one of the captains has, like, a lightning-imbued rapier.
Yeah, no, the lightning sword I got. That was fine with that. That was actually one of the moderately cool things in the story.
Yeah, and the story has magic in it. It has its own internal consistency with that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They introduce it early on. It's not like halfway through the book, he's in a jam and he needs to be able to like, he's in an action scene where he blade dances after, like, the first 5 pages. I'm cool with that. It's silly, but it doesn't make me angry that the book doesn't seem to understand its own usage of this stuff.
Yeah, but I did find it frustrating because you're just mixing this with the sort of Wild West world of Tropica. There are lots of, you know, nakedness and women. Girls serve no other purpose in this story other than to take their tits out. Like, it's literally all they do.
Yeah, okay, I'm not going to say there aren't problems with it. There is at least one major problem that I am completely confused on, but we'll save that.
You better say the ending. Like, if you're confused about...
It's not the ending.
What? It has to be the ending. The ending is...
No, it's not the ending. Okay, I have a problem with the ending, but I'm talking about something else that is a major concern.
All right. So, well, now it seems like the time to shift into your concerns, seeing as you like the book so much. So, Brady, what is your concern with the book?
Well, I'll just say a bit more about why I like it. Because
positives first, negatives last.
Yeah, positives first.
I only got negatives.
So I'm going to come out and say that this book is very descriptive, okay?
Oh, yes.
Like, in contrast to many of the other books we read, I was fine with the descriptive element of this because when he's walking around like a port town or like on the sea or something, it's very specific in the location, the kinds of clothing, the smells and these sorts of things. It actually uses your senses to give you the scene. It doesn't just go on and on and on about like what people are wearing with no purpose. It knows when to talk about someone's clothes to fill out the context of a scene and what kinds of vibes you would get from being there. It actually uses sounds and smells and taste to put you in a scene, and I felt like I could actually visualize this book more than most of the other ones, even like Hard Target.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree that it has description, and that's what I meant with, like, he's got, like, the level 1, of writing done, where he's like, I know how to, like, describe something, but I would also parry that, as Nicolas Sunblade parries everything.
With his twin scimitars.
Yeah, I would parry that with saying sometimes he does it well, like Nicolas Sunblade will be talking to someone and he'll say, oh, you think I just keep these 2 swords on my hip for, like, balance?
Yeah, I love that line.
So, yes, it's a perfect way of reminding you kind of how he looks. It's justified how he says it and all that things. But on the other side of that, he does over-describe way too much. And he does it at the most inappropriate times. He's always talking about the color of people's eyes as if it's ever relevant. And it's not, like, it's never relevant almost.
No, it's not flawless by any means. But the parts where it matters, because you could kind of get away with saying, hey, this is a pirate-themed story. You've seen Pirates of the Caribbean. Use your own imagination because you already know pretty well what it looks like. But he actually takes the time to make his scenes a bit more unique instead of just relying on the reader's knowledge of an established genre. And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good descriptive scenes and some pretty good blending of description with character feeling. At some point, he's been captured and he's in jail, and some guards come in to search him. And the line here says, Nicholas stood up from the cot and did as told, and the cold tongue of fear began licking at his neck and trailing down his spine. Like, that's a really good descriptive line, which so often the books we read are just like, Nicholas was scared.
Of course. But that's what I was saying, that most of the books we read aren't doing the level 1 stuff. Like, they're just telling you, like, oh, he was so scared, as soon as you get into the chapter, and it's like, what the fuck, Like,
yeah.
And he's beyond that. He's already got that down packed. For the most part. He still slips up a few times in some critical areas, but for the most part, he's fine.
Yeah.
But I did find myself skim reading through a lot of the action sequences because they were just so long and drawn out, and I just couldn't be bothered reading about like every single footstep he does, or like how he jumps up onto this place and that place and then spins around and shakes his ass a little bit and then says a funny line, and it's just like, I'm like, okay, does he win the fight, does he lose the fight?
Yeah, it can get a bit ridiculous and overly colorful, but another good thing I would say about the action scenes is that the magic system, or like the inclusion of magic, unlike something like Voxia, which at the start of the book just gives you like 6 pages of what a Phantom Warrior is and how their magic works, and it's all boring and stupid.
Oh, yes.
This book just has an action scene, and it includes whatever magic system they use in the action.
Yeah.
You don't get a 6-paragraph thing about what a blade dancer is. Just the first time you see Nicholas fight, he shows off his skills.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the captain of the ship has like a lightning-imbued rapier. And it's not like...
You didn't know that beforehand.
No, and most of the time we read these books, and as soon as the rapier comes out, it would stop the action for 4 pages of how he got the blade and...
Yeah. Actually, Captain...
His style was, it came from this land and all this bullshit. And it doesn't do any of that.
Yeah, and his sword was actually fueled by some sort of... And then you would get more confused as it goes on because the explanation for it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. And it would slow down the book a lot. There's another character who has a ring that, like, lets him go immaterial and turn to shadow. And, like, that's it. They don't even explain where it came from.
You don't need to. You just don't need to.
And you don't need to, exactly. He's found that balance of including something that is internally consistent, so I'm not sitting there saying, what the fuck? Like, I understand that this is realistic in the confines of his story, but he's also not giving me too much to the point where I'm like, okay, like I get it, I don't need more. So all that action works for me. Now, yes, it does get a little crazy in points where he's just like
overdoing it,
doing handstands and winking at barmaids and saying stupid shit.
It's like if you imagine like Pirates of the Caribbean where Captain Jack like will like stop and like say a quippy line right before in the middle of some sort of action, and he like picks up his hat off someone else's head and like swaps it, you know?
Yeah.
Doing that sort of shit, but like every single time and every single maneuver he does. Like he barely ever has more than a few serious movements before he has to stop and do something silly and be like, well, you know.
But I will say, and let's think about this for a second. In something like Pirates of the Caribbean, you have Jack Sparrow, and he's kind of a goofball asshat. But he's kind of the only character who does stupid shit like that. It's not like the whole book, everyone is being a quippy asshole. And it's the same here. Nicholas is the only character who is like joking around half the time, and he does have his serious moments.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So he's not just a complete farcical non-character who is a machine to deliver quips.
A machine to deliver quips.
Yeah, I mean,
I love that.
That's what most of the characters we find are. Yeah.
Quip bot.
His character is somewhat dynamic in that he is a goofball most of the time, but he's quite serious in other moments. He has some emotionally resonant scenes where he wants to assure his sister that he's not turning into like a brutal, torturing sociopath.
Mm-hmm.
He's genuine in some of his scenes, and in others where the stakes are a little lower, he acts like an idiot. You know, one of the first scenes is like, maybe we should give some context. He's a pirate, essentially.
Who? Nicolas Sunblade?
Yeah, Nicolas Sunblade.
He's not a pirate. He doesn't even know how to sail a ship. He doesn't know jack shit about it.
Okay, he's not a pirate.
He's just a blade dancer.
Yeah, he's just like a thief. He's a solar elf thief. And he returns to his village to find it burning, and his mother has been taken away by slavers. And he's off to go get them. That's your plot, basically.
It's similar to one of the books I wrote at some point.
Yeah, I was reading this and I was thinking, hey, this is pretty similar to Kim's book. Anyways, as they're trying to get information on where his mother was taken, Nicholas gets captured by Governor Lightstorm. The names of these characters are ridiculous, but...
See, I didn't even care, like, about the names in this. Like, you know, in The Blade of Voxia, I was like, fuck you, fuck this, fuck all of these names, because it's trying to take itself seriously, you know?
Yeah.
But in this, you know it's kind of like Governor Lightstorm. It's so over the top that you just accept it.
Yeah, and everyone's name is like that, so you don't really care. But at some point, they're trying to speak with this governor. Main characters are Nicolas Sunblade and his sister Gabriella. And she's like, I'm going to go talk to the governor. Nicholas, you stay here because you're a hot-headed idiot and you'll get us into trouble. And he doesn't listen. He goes in, he tries to confront this governor, and he gets captured. And he goes in jail. Now, your typical idiot quipping machine would just like, as soon as he's in jail, you know, we often find these characters who seem to know that everything will work out for them. And so when they're in a tough situation, they just act like they're going to get out of it because the story already knows that they're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
So he'd still be like joking around like an idiot. But when he gets captured, he is like, well, I'm fucked. You know, I'm looking at my last sunset right now, and this shitty food they're giving me is the best thing I've ever eaten, even though it's pretty bland. Like, he's not just a caricature. He's a dumb character, but he is a character.
I'm conceding points. You're getting a couple of points out of me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that this is on a line. You know, it's not an amazing character. It's not a totally stupid character. He has a spectrum of qualities that he flows between from time to time, and that works for this story.
Yes, it does. Now, but you said you wanted to lead with some good points and you wanted to come in with your concern. Now, what was your concern about this book? Because mine was the ending.
I still have a few more praises.
You got some more goodies to go through. All right.
Here's another one. Styling. We find so many books that don't even know what styling is. And I'm talking about, like, using fucking quotation marks properly. When a character in this book talks, and it's a long monologue, the author actually doesn't close the dialogue with quotations when he's starting a new paragraph from the same speaker. And I was genuinely impressed by that, considering how poor the styling is and everything else. Like, to get that right.
Again, very basic grammatical things coming in. And but that's, I'm not conceding any points there. That's just,
that should be the basics, yeah.
Yeah, that should be the basic, yeah.
But my main concern with this book surrounds Nicolas Sunblade and his family.
Sister.
Yeah, let's talk about this for a second.
I do want to interject and say my eyebrow was raised just in the words that he briefly used to mention his mother.
Yeah.
And my eye was raised because the mother isn't really in this story at all.
No.
But every time he's like, oh, I can't wait to get back home to see my beautiful mother. Like, oh, she's so gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Don't take that route. Please don't take that route.
Yeah.
And then the more it gets into it, like, it did take that route.
The first line that she's talked about, it's like on the 3rd page or something. And it's like, he wasn't exactly sure how long it had been since he had seen his gorgeous mother, Maria, but he wasn't prepared to let her see him in such a rugged state. And I at first thought that was a typo.
Yeah.
I thought it's either a typo or it's referring to, like, his wife that he has a child with, so she's a mother as well. But then the next time it's talked about her, it's talking about how beautiful she is, and also talks about how, like, beautiful his sister, Gabrielle, is. And there are some weird fucking scenes between the two of them.
What do you mean weird? It's just straight up, like, fucking crazy amounts of incest that everyone's okay with. Like,
yeah.
There's even a point in the book where, like, another sailor is just like, like, what about Nicholas and his wife? And the captain of the ship is just like, actually, that's his sister. And he's just like, okay, like...
Yeah, they don't even, like, try to process that. There are so many scenes where they're talking and it's like, oh... Gabriella wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him full on his lips. And she says, oh, baby brother, are you all right?
Yeah, what?
Like, all the time. And it's never talked about whether, like, I don't know, maybe in the elf society, they just...
That's okay, or like...
That's okay, or someone in your clan is your sister, but...
Now, I'm not fully against the idea that, like, you can write stuff like that. Even in a sense where it is open and it is like, perhaps it's a thing that your like race does or whatever. Yeah, go explore that place. But it didn't really seem like that in this book. It seemed more of like a personal fantasy.
Yeah.
Included into the book.
They're always like caressing each other and fondling each other and like rubbing their nose upside their neck and giving them light kisses behind the ear. And
it's constantly sexual between the two of them. There is no, like, normal brother-sister talk. It's just constantly, like, flirty, kissy, like...
Yeah.
And, of course, Gabriella, the sister, is just used constantly as, like, a honeypot.
Yeah, that's pretty annoying.
She's just constantly naked to distract the guards or the sailors or whoever else needs distracting, sitting on people's laps. Like, that's all that women serve.
When Nicholas is, like, playing tricks in a bar, doing, like, gambling scams, he uses Gabriella to, like, bait them into, that if they win, they get to sleep with her, and later, like... They use her to distract some guards by dancing naked.
Yeah.
And it's like, give this character some real things to do other than just be a sexual object.
Yeah, I mean, she is just a sexual object. And there's only, one other lady? Her name's like Celestina or something like that. And she is also just being utilized as a sexual object. And it's like, come on, man. Like, yeah, you can do that if it's the bad guys doing it to those girls, because then you're like, okay, like this is frowned upon. Nicolas Sunblade's going to save his sister from the corruption of, but he's like, no, take your titties out. Like, take your titties out. He's even in like one fight. He's just trying to get a cheaper trip on this guy's ship. And he's like, I'll fight you best guy for it, Yeah. And he's like, okay. So they go to fight. And then the sister takes her titties out to distract the dwarf man that he's fighting. But it also distracts Nicolas Sunblade. He's like, "Ooh, my sister's titties," and they both like stop and stare. It's the worst. And like you're just like, "Oh my god!" Like this.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. And if you're gonna do something like that, it has to be presented as a bad thing or like a frowned upon thing.
Or a negative aspect of this society.
Yeah, or even the main character can do it, sure. He can do it if he later, sort of comes around and doesn't do that anymore. You see the progression of change where he's like a sleazy bastard who would use his sister to like manipulate other people. And then he's like, no, actually, sister, you don't have to take your titties out anymore. I'll just,
But all the women are like, yeah, well, it's our most effective means of doing anything, so...
Yeah.
It's not like Nicholas comes up with a plan to do these things. Like, the girls are like, yeah, we'll just take our tits out.
Yeah.
And then distract the guards. Nicholas, you go in and do all the work.
Yeah, it's just so... As much credit as I could give this man for just writing like a normal person, but then he comes in with all the shit.
Yeah.
And just slaps it on in every chapter, and it's like... It ruins all of it, to be honest. Like, turn Gabriella into his, like, not even his girlfriend, just another chick, a young pirate who's trying to come up on, the game or something like that.
Yeah.
And the book would be 10 times better.
Absolutely.
Because it's not sleazy and you can relate more, perhaps this Nicholas character. There's so many better ways to do that. As soon as you involve like a sleazy aspect to it, I start going, well, like, I can't relate to this. What the fuck is this,
Yeah, and I would say that creates some dissonance in where I was talking about, like, Nicholas is a consistent goofball, womanizing idiot. But if it was, like, his perspective only that women are useful tools for distraction, that would fit his character. But it's like, the women are also like, yeah, we'll just take our tits out. Nicholas, you're the man. You go do all the thieving.
Yeah. And everyone is on board with this idea.
It's the solution to all of their problems. It's like the most effective thing they do.
It is, yeah.
Just constantly, like, taking one tit out and then...
one titty. And everyone's like, loses their minds and goes, ooh, titty! Like,
it's literally a scene when they try to heist a boat and Celestia lets one tit out and all the pirates just let them on board.
Ooh.
And then, of course, like, Nicholas and his gang steal some shit, but it's like, all they needed to do was show one tit and they're on.
It's so basic. But the funny thing is that I wanted to say that if you have sleaziness and stuff like that, but if you have one character, even if it's the main character who's sleazy like that, it's fine.
Yeah.
But if you have the whole world sleazy, then it makes me go, oh, okay, the author is sleazy.
Yes.
Like, whoever wrote this is just like, this is the world I want to live in, where the chicks are taking their titties out. Even my sister's taking her titties out. Like, it's great,
Yeah. And I can't wait to see my mom so I can get her titties out.
Yeah, I just want to take everyone's titties out. Like,
you're absolutely right. And it's definitely a fine line between having something that you wouldn't normally agree with in a story as a critique of a society.
Yeah.
Something like Game of Thrones, where they have all this sleaziness, but it's kind of clear that it's not a good thing. It's something that the characters embellish in because it's something that surrounds them. But you should be able to distinguish as the viewer or as the reader that this is not a story promoting that as like an awesome thing.
Yeah.
And it's a very fine line between that and having a story with like all this sleaziness in it and
everyone's like, hey, this is a real kabuya.
Yeah, like this is how things should be. And we could probably look more into like what that is. Why is it that we can see that this is clearly the author's point of view versus the author's critique of a point of view? And I talked a little bit about this like with John Stamatis, comparing it to Blade Runner, where they had similar societies with views on women and stuff. But I think part of it is definitely having one character that you can relate to or not relate to in terms of Simon have this weird view of women, but it not being reflected by everyone else around him.
Yeah.
But everyone around him is like, oh yeah, you got your sex bot. That's cool. Like,
that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Word up.
When do you guys get it? When's the wedding? And then you have stories that an idea is reflected in one character, but not by anyone else. And that's when you can kind of see more of as a critique than as an endorsement.
Yeah. So if we just go to the example of, because we're talking about brother-sister, so automatic hop, that's probably the most generalized thing to talk about is Game of Thrones, because there is some, awkward to say this, but well done incest. And just take that snippet out and put it as our like advertorial. Well done, incest. Where you have like Jaime and Cersei and stuff like that.
True.
And it's done in a way where like it's a secret that they have to hide, and they are like, oh, it's so right.
Yeah.
But everyone else in the world's like, oh, it's so, like, what the fuck,
It's justifiable to them, but it's not to anyone else.
Yeah, when Ned Stark figures it out in the beginning, he's like, that your child's an abomination, like, it's so abhorrent. And Ned Stark is the character that you're with in that story in the beginning.
Yeah.
So, like, the idea that they are doing this is still incredibly frowned upon and is disgusting. So, like, it's not... It's done in a power play, because that gives those characters, Jaime and Cersei, a lot to fight for. It gives them huge amounts of what you might call vigor for fighting for what they want. They have to fight against the whole world, basically.
It's also an aspect of trying to preserve their bloodline and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It makes sense in that story.
Yeah. And you don't approve of what they're doing, but you understand it in a way.
Yeah.
Like, you understand their, like, pathos and what they think about the world, and you're fine with it. And it is weird, but you don't want to be them necessarily.
No, but you can sympathize with it, and it's still treated as a taboo.
Yeah.
In this story, they acknowledge it's a taboo. Literally a line, it says, the taboo feeling of the situation amplified the dire butterflies that had started flapping their massive wings in Gabriella's stomach. She didn't protest when Nicholas's hand slipped inside the fold of her towel and lovingly sought her skin. It's like the book knows this is a taboo.
Yeah.
It's not like unaware, but there is that scene where one of the sailors is like, oh, Nicholas and his wife. And the captain's like, actually, it's his sister. And they're just like, oh, yeah, sorry. Thanks for the correction. By the way, we've got a pirate ship off the sea, like...
Yeah, just by the way.
They don't even try and, like, that's a little weird, or,
Yeah, what the fuck? That's all they're making out, like...
Yeah, now, maybe that's something that will be a little more elaborated upon in the sequel to Pirates of Tropica, because this book ends on a bit of a cliffhanger.
Yeah, no, it doesn't just end on a cliffhanger. He falls off the fucking cliff, gets bitten by a shark in the waters from the cliff, and then wakes up on another shore. All within a few paragraphs.
Can I just ask?
What the fuck?
Kim, why don't people end their books?
I don't know. I think it's because they never really wanted to do that in the first place. They never had the ABC. They never had the middle structure planned out. They never had that level 2.
Yeah.
All they wanted was the fantasy. They wanted the description, but they never actually wanted to write a story. And a story ends. And I don't think people want their stories to end. They want whatever it is that they want out of it. I don't know.
Clearly, this guy just likes spending time in this world he's created.
Yeah.
And that's evident by the structure of the plot, which is it sets them off on trying to find their mother.
They don't.
No.
They don't find the mother.
They don't find the mother.
They don't find the mother. They don't do jack shit.
But this is the type of plot that is suitable for an adventure story, because they have this kind of overarching goal, and it's going to take them a while to get there. First, they have to find out where she is, then they have to sail around looking for her and all this sort of stuff. They'll get a location, it'll turn out not to be, they'll have to search again, blah, blah, blah. That's your basic adventure story. And this allows them to visit different ports and have adventures on the high seas. And, there's like a little scene where they go to a bar and Nicholas does some gambling. And then there's the heist scene on another boat where they get the scroll.
Yeah, you get all the little bits and pieces out of this world that, like, you might want from living in that world.
Yeah, and that's how you can tell that this is a story that isn't really about the story. It's more just about, let me take you to these various locations and show you what it's like to be here, and we'll go and see some fun piratey stuff. And the fact that there is basically no ending, because they're looking for this guy who captured their mother. His name is Darkwind, which is the subtitle of this book. And they, reach his compound. Nicholas gets shot, fade to black. He wakes up on a shore. The end.
Epilogue, by the way. He gets shot. And you think he's dead, and you're like, okay, epilogue. And then he is obviously been thrown overboard.
Yeah.
He's in the water. He gets bitten by a shark, but it's a little bit hazy.
Yeah, but elves have restorative properties in this universe, so he's fine.
Yeah, they're pretty hard to kill, as far as I can tell. And so he gets shot, bitten by a shark, and then washes up on shore where, some native tribesman is, looking at him.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, great. So he's obviously living. and still pretty chirpy about the situation. But he didn't find his mother, doesn't know what happened to his sister, and got shot and bitten and drowned and somehow still lives.
Yeah, that's not the ending to a story.
That's not the ending to a story.
That's not even the ending to a multi-part story.
No.
That's like a halfway point in a book.
Yeah. That's like the fall. That's like the bottom, he's got nothing left. It's like, that's the usual scene where in a movie or something like that, he would be locked up in prison with no way to escape and he's heading to the gallows. He's already done that scene in this book, but more of just in a cliche way, less than it's actually his fall.
Yeah.
And the fall in this comes right at the end, apparently, and you don't know how he's going to get out of it, but that's it.
Yeah, that should not be the ending to this book. That should be the midpoint.
Yes.
And then in the next part of the saga, which should be the second half of this book, really, we would see Nicolas get out of whatever situation he's in, find his sister, find his mother, fight Darkwind, the end.
Yeah.
Then if you want to take him on another adventure, do that. But when we talk about like the ABC, the 3-act structure, or anything like this, you also need to be able to translate that into a multi-part series. And every trilogy operates the same way a single story does, in a way. You have your beginning narrative, your middle narrative, and your end narrative, and they should also flow along the same kind of 3-act structure that each individual story does.
Yeah.
Ending your book at what would be the midpoint of one story is not how you also blend a story into a multi-part narrative.
No, and you can see this traditionally with like a story that ends with like the heroes winning, but the defeated cyborg, the Terminator, right at the end of the movie, his eye lights up red, Yeah. To let you know that he's not actually defeated, and then comes the sequel. Like, that's the perfect setup, like, because, the heroes win, but maybe they haven't, won quite enough.
Yeah.
But having him not accomplish the thing that he set out to do in the beginning of the story and having this weird epilogue, like that's not really what epilogues are used for.
No, and not even having Darkwind appear in the fucking book that his name is a part of the title.
Yeah, you don't have any of that in the book. And it's kind of insulting because you're like, did you really write this book to write a story, or you just wrote it to do a fantasy thing for yourself?
Yeah.
Is this book for me, or is it for you? Because if it's for you, I don't want to read it. I don't want to read your incest fantasies. I don't want to read your weird shit. I like you write that for yourself. Think about it. Do whatever you want. But I don't want to read that. If you got me a story to read, then please, But
yeah, and this has the setup of a real pirate story that I want to find. I want to see Nicolas fight Darkwind. I actually want to see that. I don't want to spend half the book talking about how beautiful his sister is and that he wants to get his mom back so they could all have a weird, fucked up elf 3-way.
It was so weird. It was so weird. Now, I also wanted to mention that there are some weird inconsistencies. There are some very strange things that I had trouble passing. And there are a lot of things I just generally pass on these sort of books. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'll move past it. No problem. But generally, I find the more that a person explains something, the more I go, okay, then why is this person doing this? You just explained something, and now he's doing something that seems to be against your actual explanation.
Yeah, before you explained it, I wasn't questioning it. Then when you start breaking it down, I'm like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and this is a reoccurring problem in these sort of stories that we seem to be reading. And my main problem is Nicolas Sunblade discovers that his mother has been taken by the slaver Darkwind. Yes?
Yeah.
And he, for some reason, gets accused of the crime himself, then ends up escaping from the local people, and then ends up aboard a pirate ship under this pirate Captain Castile.
Yeah.
Now, this Castile character explains to him in quite detail why it wouldn't be good practice for Darkwind to take the captives all the way across the world to sell them in this one location, because the slave trade doesn't operate everywhere. It only operates really heavily in this one location. Other places too, but sparsely, and the best price to get a good slave deal is in this one. And he says, wow, the distance to travel per, and it's like, what, you get 3,000 platinum per head, and then you have to pay for all the expenses of traveling a ship all that way to do that?
Yeah, you gotta feed the crew and all this.
And then, right after that scene, this pirate captain, this master of economics, makes this deal with this man who just comes aboard his ship, and this guy goes, okay, I want you to help me not only attack other ships, which will cost you a tremendous amount of manpower and equipment and seafaring and
sail into the most treacherous waters, helmed by the most formidable pirate lord you've ever heard of.
Yeah, for 300 to 100 platinum. And I was like, okay, fuck you. You didn't even think about this. You didn't even think about this whole fucking thing. You just said whatever number you thought, because you've introduced these currencies, but they have no meaning to you. So you just said 3,000 at one point, and you've said 100 now. And I've just read this, and I've gone, wait a minute. Didn't you just say that would be like economically irresponsible to travel all that way for this amount of? And I'm like, oh, fuck you. Like you. Fuck.
And then he gets it cut down even more to like 100 platinum because he enters a physical contest with one of the crewmates.
This midget, yeah.
And wins because his sister pulls a tit out.
Oh my god. It's so stupid. And like,
yeah. The economy makes no fucking sense, and you're right. One scene after, he's just laid down a pretty well done economical reasoning.
Yeah, I would have been fine with that explanation if he didn't just then like butter it all up with this silly like transaction with this Nicolas Sunblade. Like,
yeah, so that we can have a fight scene and that so Gabrielle can get a tit out.
Yeah, it's so stupid.
So it kind of forgoes a lot of the pretty well done world building for stupidity and stupid comical scenes like that.
Yeah, that's a golden example of how you can ruin your own book with over explanation. Like, you could have excluded that whole part about like why it was economically bad and just said, oh, I don't think the trade winds are going that way, so I think he went that way instead, you know? And then, okay, whatever, you know, like, let's go that way.
Either that, or keep the economics reasoning, and then, you know, if you're sitting there thinking, well, we haven't had a fight scene in a while, come up with a better reason to get Nicolas into a fight than to tie it to his parlay with the captain.
Yeah. Let's say that whatever that dwarf was that he ended up fighting, let's say that man made like a brag challenge to be like, if you can beat me in a fight, I'll take you anywhere you want. I'll pay it out of my personal pocket.
Yeah.
And then Nicolas Sunblade, all right, man, like, if you win, then whatever. And if you lose, then you have to pay our fare for going this way or doing whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, I've sat down for 5 minutes and thought about this and come up with a better explanation. And it's like, man, you wrote a fucking book. You wrote this book and you didn't think about it.
Well, I think the reason they chose to do the fight scene gamble thing was to further display Nicholas's, let's call it, resourcefulness. Because they say, like, you know, at first it was going to be like 300 platinum for them to sail. And Nicholas gets it cut down to 100 if he beats this crew member in a fight. And then Gabrielle is like, why did you do that? And he's like, because I only have 100 platinum. If he didn't make the bet, otherwise they wouldn't have been able to travel. And it's trying to show you, like, wow, you know, Nicholas, he's a great liar and he's so resourceful and he always lives by the risk and uses his money wisely and this sort of thing. But there are like 6 other scenes where we see that, where he's like gambling in the town hall and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So we already have lots of reasons to think that he's like this kind of scummy, swashbuckling rogue boy.
A scoundrel.
Yeah, he's a premium scoundrel. And you don't need yet another scene like that if it's also going to take away from another scene that you just had. We're explaining the economics of this world.
Yeah.
Now, another thing I want to say about this book, and it's time for more complaints, is that everyone in this fucking book is a goddamn supermodel.
Oh, of course.
Every single person, every time they're introduced, they're like, he was so goddamn handsome, and he had these flashy emerald eyes, and blah, 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 and Gabrielle was so beautiful, and Celestina was...
As soon as she gets naked, everyone's like, what? Like, can't even take their eyes off. Like,
yeah. Everyone who's not a main character is like a toothless, dirty pirate.
Yeah. We seem to be stylizing this podcast as if, like, people are searching for writing advice. If you want to write a fucking book to begin with, don't make anything about your characters attractive. Make them interesting in regards to what they do, and don't let them have a free pass on so many situations just based on how they look, because it's so weak. It's so unrealistic too. Even the hottest person in the world isn't like so good looking that it'll stop you from fighting someone.
Yeah.
Like, come on, that's just stupidly silly.
If you want me to be impressed with a character, impress me with their knowledge or their capabilities. Don't have something that they have no control over, which is how they look when they're born, have so much weight in terms of how much I'm supposed to like them or how easily they can move through the world or navigate conflicts.
Yeah.
It's just another aspect of a character that makes me think everything is so fucking easy for them. Nicolas Sunblade, he's never really in danger until the end. He's like the most handsome dude on the planet, and he can like do 6 backflips and jump between walls while also winking at everyone.
Yeah. Think about any great story. Like, the characters in a great story aren't all just super fucking attractive. They're not. They're usually pretty hard done by.
Yeah.
No one loves Harry Potter characters because they're fucking super hot and just get their way because they're super sexy.
Yeah.
And just swag their way out of every situation. No, they're usually clumsy or lucky or like just very skillful.
Yeah.
And those sort of things we can relate to because you experience those things in your life, and it turns your story into a personal fantasy.
Yeah.
Because in your personal fantasy, everyone is good looking.
Everyone's after the main character. Even his own family members just cannot resist him.
It just can't do it, yeah. And after reading this book, I read the first few chapters where he's like, my beautiful mother, and it's like so much more creepy now. Yeah. It's like, ugh, bleh. Yuck.
Yeah. Now, there are, a last few good and bad things I'll say. One thing I really didn't like is how often the narration uses verbs to describe what the dialogue just did. And I mean in the way it'll be like, from the looks of him, he's always the girl, insulted the man towards Nicholas.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we can tell by what he said it was an insult. Or it'll be Nicholas will say something really flirty, and then the narration will go, he flirted with the handsome pirate, and it's like,
why did you say that?
Yeah, that's just a writing error that can be easily fixed.
Yeah. If you had put this past some sort of actual publisher or, I don't know about an actual publisher, but perhaps like a friend who reads. I don't know, like how much qualification do you need to tell someone like, yo, you don't need to say he's insulted someone after I just read, fuck you, like. Yeah. Like, that doesn't require too much skill to tell someone, like.
Now, there are a few clever things in this, like when Nicholas is captured and he's in the jail and he meets this other character named Cross, who I'm assuming is going to come back in some capacity because he was a bit of a mysterious character. And he seemed to allude to Nicholas that he's met him before and that he's heard of him. Nicholas has this like memory problem. He keeps saying he can't remember parts of his past.
Yeah, which never comes up really.
Yeah, and characters keep making mention and like, it's like, oh, you've done this before. And he's like, what? I've never done this before.
What the fuck are you talking about?
So that's probably going to come into play in a later book. We'll see.
Brady, you can't make me read the sequel. I'm not going to read it.
We're reading the sequel.
I'm not reading the sequel.
We're reading the sequel.
You could read the sequel and tell me about it. I'm not reading the sequel. I'm not, because I feel like in the sequel, he's going to bang his sister, and I don't want to read that. I don't want to read that. And he'll probably bang his mother too, and I don't want to read that either. I just don't. There's only two places to go. It's either his mom or his sister, and he's either that's something for you, bro. Like, it's not me.
We have to find out if he gets to Darkwind.
But isn't it so disappointing, that someone can write, even if it's like a whole book's length, but just write half of a story, publish it, sell it? Isn't that just disappointing? Like, it's just like, you couldn't even fucking finish it, Like, what the... Like, you couldn't even muster up the fucking courage to go out and finish your own goddamn story. You had to just cut it short.
Well, I think, he will finish it, I think. And it's just a failure to understand that this is not a full book. This is half a book.
Yeah, but why are you writing books if you don't understand how, like, a story is written? Like, what the fuck? What are you doing?
Yeah, true.
Like, it doesn't take that much research. It doesn't take that much knowledge. It doesn't take that much inquiry.
No. All it takes is reading, like, one fucking book.
Yeah, and thinking about it and going like, okay, this book was successful, and why do people like this book? Oh, because it ends.
Yeah, and things should still happen after the climax.
Of course. Of course.
Like, don't climax your book and then end it like this one does. A climax is not a main character getting shot and then not knowing anything about what happens and not concluding the story you've set up to begin with. That's not an ending. That's not a climax. Finish your goddamn book.
I want to say that, like, one of the most important parts of Lord of the Rings, if you are actually looking at it in terms of meaning, is what happens after they defeat Sauron. You know, like, they go into, like, a pub.
Yeah.
And they've just gone on this huge, big adventure, and none of the other hobbits give a fuck because they're all obsessing about this guy with the huge pumpkin.
Yeah.
And it's a really impactful scene because it is a lot of the time what people feel like when they do something extremely heroic or extremely brave and they come back to normal society and they don't get shit for it. No one cares. And it's just like World War II, you know, like people would go through this extreme amount of trauma and then come back and everyone's just obsessed with the big pumpkin.
Yeah. Not only that, but the hobbits look around the tavern and they, like, can't see themselves fitting back into their normality because they've gone through this grand traumatic adventure. And it is important for a story sometimes for characters to return to the place they came from and see either how that place has changed or how they have changed. And the characters in Lord of the Rings have changed dramatically, and it's almost like they can't just go back. They still have the experiences with them.
Yeah. And that's an important part to include if you're looking for meaning from the story. And that's all I wanted to say in terms of like how you can add things after the climax or the final battle. And usually what we see in the stories we look at is that as soon as the bad guy is dead, the story is like, it ends on that very sentence. Like it will literally be like, boom, done. Like,
yeah, China's throwing bucket full of bullets. Like, they both end like as soon as the conflict is over. There's no resolution at all.
And sometimes, if you get a depth of reality, it doesn't even bother with that. He'll just charge up his final fucking attack all the way up to his omniapex, and then, like, he'll throw the ball of energy, and no, it just doesn't tell you what happens.
Yeah.
Does he win? Does he lose? Doesn't matter. No one gives a fuck.
Fuck you. Book's over.
Fuck you. Book's over. Yeah. So, that was Tropico.
Or half of it.
Yeah, half Tropico.
Will we read the sequel?
I'm not going to read the sequel. You can read it and tell me about it. You can definitely read it to me and tell me about it. If you disclude some of the weird parts of it that I'm sure to come. I feel like, you know, when you include these sexual fantasies, they can only get bigger. You know, they can only, like, increase in size. There's no, like, his relationship with his sister is a bit on the back pedal. Now it's time for Darkwind. No. The sister thing is going to go full force.
It's going to become the main part of the story.
Yeah, it was the main part of this story. Just like I want to go out there and start. I've said this before, I think, but I want to shake writers by their shoulders and go, please don't write your sexual fantasies. Please don't write your sexual fantasies. Please don't write your sexual fantasies. Like,
at this point, I'm saying, please write your sexual fantasies, but keep your family out of it.
Yeah. Okay. Just tell me, like, in the beginning, that it's going to be that. Like,
authors should start putting a discretion warning in the titles of their books, saying this is about how I want to fuck my sister.
Yeah, and because like a lot of the discretion warnings on books are just like, this book contains some graphic stuff, you know, some sex stuff, but, you know, don't worry about it. And if you do read it and you don't like it, fuck you. Like, it's just like, it doesn't really go, okay, this story has some incest stuff in it, you know, and that's basically what the book is about. So if you don't like that, then maybe don't read it. Because then I would be like, okay, yeah, I don't want to read it. I thought this was about pirates. Like, I thought this book was about like weird magical pirates and not about incest. But you know, if you're gonna flip it around halfway through, I guess. So yeah, that was Tropico. Brady, would you suggest this book? Would you suggesting it to people? Now, the last book in season 2, I'm going to give every book a rating, my own personal. I call it my K rating. That's my Kim rating. My last book got a 0 out of 10. This book I will give a 2 out of 10. Like, it's getting like, it's got like basic writing down, but weird fantasies. You haven't written a story. It doesn't end. So you failed on so many things that would at least get you some points, but I'll give you a few points for some good description.
You know what? Despite all the praise I have for it in certain areas, I also hated a lot of it. I'm also going to give it a 2.
Yeah.
And that's because it's got half of a good idea. It's got half good pirate stuff, half weird incest stuff. So half a good idea for half a book. So it gets like a 2.5.
You're a generous man. You're a generous man.
I'm quite generous with my praise. Standards are low. Yeah, that was the Pirates of Tropica. Dark Wind, part 0.5.
Oh my god.
And Kim, what are we going to read next time?
Well, in our absolute failure to actually get a good sci-fi story, we're going back to the genre to try find one, and we have come up with a book called Planet Bowland.
By an author named Islin Welch.
Okay, well, I'll let you handle the author's name.
God damn it, it's going to be a very hard intro to do. But why don't you tell me a little bit about Planet Bowland?
Now, it seems to be your classic, I like to call them fertilization stories, you know, like setting the seeds for a later period. It's a colonial. We go to a planet, we settle ourselves, and we strap ourselves in for the adventure. I guess you could call it a Western.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a sci-fi story, but it's basically a Western. You have a minute amount of people go to a location that's very remote and surely dangerous, and they try to live there.
Yeah.
Just like in the Wild West. And I'm sure it's going to be great. Going to be exciting.
Hopefully it's an actual sci-fi book this time.
I hope he focused on the story, because the cover page for it seems to be some terribly aligned and pixelated images of just various landscapes.
Yeah, I'm getting some Galactic Redemption 4 vibes with the pictures of mountains here.
Yes. And I don't really know, like, it seems very rushed. Doesn't have the time put into it like a Pirates of Tropica, which might have one of the best covers I've ever seen for a book, and it's nothing special. It's just like literally a pirate flag.
Well, I'm actually going to disagree there, because the pirate flag on the cover of this book is your typical skull and crossbones, but
it should have been the other one.
Yeah, it should have been the pirate flag that they describe in the story, which is like a vampire skull, and that's not what's on the cover here. It's just a Jolly Roger.
Yeah.
So, Planet Bowland.
Planet Bowland. Thank you everyone for listening and supporting the show. And please, if you can, support us on Patreon, and doubly so, share our podcast with your friends. It's a huge help, and thank you to all of those who already do that. If you have a book you want us to look at, share it with us on one of our platforms and we'll consider it for the show. Thanks!